Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to be planting a bog-style forest using black spruce and larch trees. I've got all the elements for the forest in front of me here, my spruce trees and my larch trees. This will be the first time I've tried a mixed species planting or forest. And I'm also going to try something new, and I'm going to try featuring a dead tree as the main tree in the forest. I have two spruce trees here that I was growing as bonsai, and they died about maybe 10 years ago. And I've always kept them because I like the styling of them. And I always thought, well, I can use it in a forest someday as a dead tree. So I always keep my old dead bonsai trees because, you know, it can add an element of realism in a bonsai forest. In past videos, I've talked about using a mirror or a sheet of glass to represent water in a forest planting. I think it would work quite well, but I don't think I'm going to use it in this planting. I think I'll just plant like a sandy bog and have moss represent the wetland areas. I think I'll try the mirror or the glass out in another planting to see how it works there. I've got a few examples of rocks that I could use in this planting, and I'm thinking the rugged rocks like these are cement rocks that Josh and I made, I think last summer or maybe even 2 years ago. I don't think they would suit the northern landscape. In northern Canada, as the glaciers retreated, it kind of scraped all the rocks smooth. So you get these really large, smooth, rocky areas up north. So I think this represents a northern Canada bog more than a rugged type rock like this. So I'm going to use this kind of granite. It's a very lightweight, because it's kind of almost hollowed out underneath, granite rock, and I think that will represent northern Canada really well, this kind of smooth glacier scraped rock. I'll save the rugged cement type rocks for a different planting. The larches that I have out front here are the perfect size for this planting. The rabbits pruned all the branches off them. They pruned them off short, so they're going to be very skinny columnar trees. And it's starting to make my spruces look quite large, so I may have to go in and prune these spruces back, or these spruce back even further to make them a tighter triangle and get that sort of arrow shape on top going. The pot that I've chosen for this planting is a large mica pot. It's made in Korea. They're really durable. They'll never crack in the cold or anything. It'll outlive me, that's for sure. It's the same size pot that I have my larch forest in and my cedar avatar grove in. Here's a look at the avatar grove, so you can see kind of the density of trees you can get in a pot this size. I have a lot of trees in this planting. And from the front it looks like, you know, a fairly dense forest. My larch forest is also in the same size pot, and these are larger trees, but you can see I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trees in here. So yeah, you can create quite a nice forest feel with this size pot. It's big enough to create a landscape underneath the forest. So I think it'll be perfect for this bog type planting. One of the concepts of this forest is to have the larch trees placed in front of the spruce trees. So the spruce trees will create a dark green backdrop, and then in fall, when the larches change colors, they'll turn a bright yellow color, and that yellow will contrast against the dark green in the background, and it should really make them pop out and look spectacular. So I've got to place all the larch trees in the front and the spruce trees behind them. I've also got to create interest in this planting. If I were to just plant all the trees across in rows, it would look boring. It would just be, all the trees would be about the same height. There'd be no change of terrain in the landscape. It's got to have some visual impact, and maybe that's why I'm using those dead trees. I'm going to try it anyway, put those dead trees out front to kind of be a main focus to the planting. And then all the rest of the trees will be more like, not background trees, but creating distance in the planting. So it's going to be really important to create that kind of forced perspective As I go back in the pot, I want to plant more densely. I want those trunks to be smaller towards the back. I want the trees to be smaller towards the back to give you that feeling of infinite distance of this bog type forest. Here's a view looking down at the pot. So if I have the dead tree kind of out front, you know, I don't want it near the edge of the pot, but set back a bit comfortably in sort of this position, I think. There's two of them. Then that creates one element on this side of the planting. I can maybe put the rock on the other side to kind of counteract that, or have the rock kind of behind those, because, you know, they're quite dense, the branches on those dead trees, so you can't really see through too much. So I could have all my spruce kind of planted around this rock, maybe a couple behind the rock. That might create some asymmetry to this planting, which is what I'm after. I don't want it to look symmetrical, because symmetry just isn't very visually appealing. It's nice to have differences in your planting, you know, difference in height of your planting, difference in the look from left to right. So you kind of have to explore, so you're not getting the same thing in all parts of the forest. I'm going to arrange all the trees from tallest to shortest, thickest trunk to skinniest trunk now. So I'll have to put them on the ground so I can clear the bench off. Here's a look at the spruce now, all in a row from smallest towards the camera, going to taller in the distance. And that'll help me when I go to plant them, you know, picking the trees to get the different heights. The larch here are all about the same size, but I do have a few more larch I can add, so I'm going to go look for those now. I've already repotted most of the larch trees that Jonathan donated to me into these pots that Tom sent to me. And Tom has a YouTube channel, Grow and Clip Bonsai for Seniors, that you can check out. I still had 3 more larches to repot, the ones that Jonathan gave me, so I've got 3 there and 5 over here. So that's plenty of larches for this planting. I do like the idea of using these spruce in the bog type forest. It adds a natural element to it. Often in bogs you see dead trees in the middle of the bog that just drowned. As landscapes change, you know, different areas get flooded and trees die off. So I'm going to try and use them. I may have to prune back some of the branches just a little bit, but I want to keep as many as I can. It took me a long time to develop these trees. It's unfortunate they died, but they'll go on as dead trees into the future. I'll try and keep as much of this branching as I can, but I'll try and reduce it to a tighter cone-shaped tree. So I'm looking from above, and I'll just start reducing branches at kind of natural points, trying to keep it all looking very natural. And all this lichen that's grown on the dead trees helps to make the tree look very natural too. It's something that you would see on a tree that's been dead for a long time. I like this spruce. It was very cascading. It was good. The reason it died, it was that winter that our furnace broke, and instead of bringing my trees inside, I had to chop firewood, keep the house warm for 3 days. It dropped to some horrendously low temperatures, so I just couldn't take care of my trees at that time. So all the trees stayed outside on the benches, and I lost quite a few trees because of it. And again, it's just something that happens in life. You can't, you know, you have priorities, and sometimes your trees aren't the main priority. Yeah, it was a strange winter. The cold weather just suddenly came on very quickly. All right, that's a tighter triangle, and I've kept most of the branches on the tree. I'll try and do the same for the other tree, but there's a lot of thick lower branches, and I want to bring the 2 trees closer together. So I may have to remove some of these branches and just keep a little bit of foliage up top. Or not foliage, but branch structure up top. So well, that's certainly got that tree more compact. And I think it still looks good. I'll get the two dead spruce separated from the soil down here. I'll keep kind of a pad of soil around the base of the tree, and that way I can move them a little closer together and arrange them in the pot. Even though it's t-shirt weather today, over here there's still snow in the corner. There's a look at that snow there. Yeah, it's beautiful outside, but we've still got snow. The root ball underneath these dead spruce is definitely frozen, so I may have to get the saw out and cut them apart that way. All right, I've got the hacksaw out. I'm going to cut through it, and then I gotta cut it in the middle because I want to get these trees closer together. They're too far apart. Like that, and then I'll take a slice out of the middle here. Like that. I'll want to find the front for this tree. I'm finding it's pretty symmetrical, so I think anywhere is good. The apex kind of comes slightly forward here, so I'll pick this as the front. And then for the second tree, this side is flatter, so if I wanted to mate the two trees together, they would definitely, you know, look best like this. Now this tree is probably slightly larger than the other tree, but if I put it out front, it's not as interesting. So I think I want to put it in the background, maybe even almost hidden behind the first tree. Maybe I can raise this one up a bit in the soil so it's higher than the one behind, and I could take some off the root base here to lower it down in the planting so it makes this tree look larger. So I'll do that. I'll take some soil off the bottom of this one. There is a famous dead tree in the world, and that is the tree from Jurassic Park, the movie. It's the tree that in the first movie there was a herd of dinosaurs running across the landscape, and they ran and hid behind this tree, and then all the dinosaurs jumped over top of the dead tree. And that tree is in Hawaii, and it is a famous tourist attraction. People come from all over and they pose beside this dead tree. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that a dead tree can be a tourist attraction. Okay, that's reduced down. So let's see now. If I raise this one up a bit. Yeah, I think that'll do the trick quite nicely. I find with these forest plantings that you've always got to leave some room at the edge of the pot, both left and right. Here, some room. If you put the trees right to the edge of the pot, the forest looks like it's jammed into the pot and it's really crowded, that the pot is constraining the forest. So it's best to put, you know, some small trees at the very edge and kind of create your shape of your forest that way. Usually kind of a asymmetrical triangle to the upper profile of the forest. Looks good. And even if your trees are all the same size, you can still do it with the terrain. You can pile your soil up in an asymmetrical triangle, and then when you plant the trees on the top of that soil, you'll also mirror that asymmetrical triangle with the profile of your forest. And it'll look quite good. What you don't want is, you know, all your trees jammed vertically in the pot. The profile of the forest is straight across at the top. It just looks very rectangular and very boring. So we'll try and avoid that in this planting. I've showed you my accent plants in previous videos, and I was thinking they would look really good as a bog type growth. They look like reeds or something growing in a bog, or a bog type plant. They don't get so dense that you can't see the moss below, which is good. This is wild chamomile, and I don't know what this is. It's some kind of a ground cover. It usually grows in sidewalks and kind of hugs the ground. When it's in a pot like this, it grows a little taller, but I can always prune it. So I was thinking that would look really good in the bog. It would create that feeling of a dense bog, the one that you just never want to walk through because you'd sink up to your waist. I'm going to play around with placing the rock in the composition now. I'd like to include it because it's makes the plant look very northern. Looks like northern Canada. So if it gets too crowded, I can always use a smaller rock or remove it entirely. But I'll place it in there for now and we'll see how it goes. I think I need the rock, the stone, over with these dead trees. I like these two spruce here, and I'm thinking I don't want to plant much on the edges of the pot anyway, so I could have the stone kind of towards this side and maybe have this is sort of my high ground and then the bog area is more over this side of the pot, so I'll kind of have a difference, almost like a land water penjing. So maybe that'll do. So maybe it'll look like the bog expanded and killed off these trees. So I'll try that. I'll put some soil in, raise the stone up and try and position it in the pot. And I'll have a small tree off to this side, maybe a couple. Yeah, I'll see how that goes. I'll place some drainage screens in the pot, and then I can add the soil. The soil I'm using is the soil that I used with that giant yew tree. The yew tree never grew, it never grew any roots. I root pruned it way too much. It's unfortunate. If it had lived, it would have had a fantastic root base, but it didn't grow any roots and it just slowly withered away and died. So this soil is basically new. So I'm reusing the soil. It's too good to not use. All right, into the bog it goes. So I've got to get a height for my stone here. I don't want it, I want these edges to go down into the soil, so just slightly below the lip of the pot. Pretty close there. And I do want room behind it to plant a few trees if I had to. Now I'm going to try placing the trees in the planting. So that was my front. I think I've got to take some soil off the bottom of this one too. It's just sitting too high in the pot. So I'll remove some of that. There. Okay, that should work quite well now. And it does. Here's a look at the composition so far. So far I'm liking it. I've got that stone there, which I like. I've got the two dead trees. They look great. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how many trees I can fit in and how they look. Very interesting. There's a look at the amount of space I'm dealing with. So my bog area, and then all the trees have to go in. So I'll put drainage screens across all the other holes and put a base layer of soil in, and then I'll start arranging trees. I'm going to start the planting with the larch trees, putting them kind of out front, and then the background will be the spruce trees. So I've got to think how I'm going to put them in. I can't just like place them in a row. It's got to look interesting. So I always like the idea of having a central line through the forest that kind of curves around the back. It kind of gives your place an eye to go into the planting and explore. So I think I'll be leaving a space in the middle of the planting here, at least, you know, with at least between these spruce and the larch trees. So I think the larches will be a clump over here and maybe a few over this side towards the front. Both the spruce trees and the larch trees came from a tree nursery, and they were planted in a circular plug of soil, a fairly deep circular container. And then I transplanted them into these root maker pots, at least the larch. So I'm going to pull it out. And I'm looking at the roots, and I don't see any white tips on the roots at all. So the roots aren't active yet. So it means you could safely root prune this and plant it. I'm not going to do a lot of root pruning because these aren't going to be specimen trees. They're not going to be planted where people are going to look at the root base. They will naturally kind of get a radial root base, but there'll be a lot of roots down in the soil that won't be very radial. It won't be kind of a flat radial root base. It'll be a little more tangled. But that's okay for these forest plantings because it's not as critical. So I do have to prune it enough that I can get these larch planted deep enough in the pot that they're down kind of at the bog level. So I will have to cut off, you know, probably this level of the roots. I tried combing the roots out, but the central area where the tree was originally planted is very dense. So I'm just going to come in with the hacksaw. I think it's frozen too. Yeah, it is. Maybe that's why I couldn't comb it out. This is frozen at the core. Very solid. Okay, so that's what I'll plant. That should be a good height. I'll try it out anyway. All right, so I'm going to put, I want a living tree out front here. So maybe it's got a lot of side branches down low. I could kind of put it in about there, maybe. This tree, I think it'll look good here because it has a deadwood section on it. That kind of will be a transition between the two dead trees and the living trees. I think I'll place another larch kind of back in here and maybe even a third here. So cut the roots off once again. So there's a look at it so far. It's pretty hard to imagine what it'll look like with all the trees in here. Yeah, it's a very difficult planting to kind of get a grasp of what's going to look good and what's not. So it might just be a matter of me, you know, planting trees, and when I get it all planted, maybe I'll know what to do. I'll kind of say, oh, that doesn't look good, and maybe that does look good, and I'll get some more ideas. So I do know I want all my larches kind of towards the front, so I'll keep planting. I've got to get some trees planted over on this side now. This next larch is a good small size one to plant over on the far side of the planting. However, these lowest branches are too long, so I've got to bring them in tighter. So I'll give it a pruning. I'll have to dig out a little pocket for it to go in here. I'm going to place the next larch, kind of have my gap between here over towards this side. And I've got 3 more larch, small ones, that I could maybe make a little clump of 3 over on this side of the planting. Here's a look at the forest now with the clump of 3 trees over on this side. I think so far it's still looking good. I have one more larch that really got pruned down hard. So I'll put that on the very left-hand edge of the planting and see how that looks. The only place I could place that larch is kind of at the edge between the pot and the rock. And if you look in this view, it kind of, like I said, it's jammed up against the edge of the pot here, right here. And it doesn't look good. So I've got to move it in more. I may leave that as negative space on the outside of the pot there. Just doesn't look good, jammed up against the edge. I think I'll place that little one over on the right-hand side here. It looks quite nice in that clump over there. Kind of makes that triangular transition to the edge of the pot. Here's a look at the bog forest so far. So now comes the hard part, which is adding the spruce, the black spruce trees, which are quite large. I may have to risk pruning them down, as I said. Well, let's start. Let's get out the black spruce. I'll start with these smallest ones first. Here's my smallest, most compact black spruce. So I'll get that out of the pot and we'll try it out in the planting. Hopefully it'll look good. Here's a look at the roots on the black spruce. So again, there's no growing tips active yet. So it's a good time of the year to repot it. And the root system's quite good. It's fine, fibrous. There's the original plug it was planted in. So I'll do a little root pruning just to get the root base more compact. If you left the roots long like this, there's no way you'd get all these trees close together. They'd be all kind of spaced equally and it would look very artificial. So in the forest you want variation in the distance between your trees. So I'll take some off the bottom here. That looks pretty good. I think that's got a good shallow root system. There's enough fibrous roots on here to keep the tree looking good and growing well. Oh, really tangled up this long one. It's got to come off. There. Okay, I'll try this out in the forest now. I think that'll be the front for the tree. The next spruce here isn't quite so compact. It's small, but it's quite spreading. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill off a few of these lower branches, or I'll prune them back, and maybe they'll live, but probably not. I'll prune them back. That one's got to go. It's too long without any foliage near the trunk. I'll leave a dead spot on it like that. And this one I can prune it back to here and here. I don't know if they'll live, but makes it more compact. Take a little more off here. Kind of gambling, you know, reducing this back. They may live, they may not. I've seen rabbits with spruce in the ground. I've seen rabbits chew them right back, and sometimes they get little buds come out of the trunk. So they can take a hard pruning, but that's in the ground, so I don't know about these ones in pots. I think that's as much as I dare prune it back. Even this may not live, but we'll see. So once again, I'll reduce the root system on this spruce, getting it a little bit shallower. I shouldn't be using my pruners for this, but there, I've got my scissors. It's better to use these than those nice pruners. Okay, so that's got it a little more compact. I got to take more off the bottom because it's got to fit in this shallow kind of bog. Sort of like that. And then I can kind of tease out the remaining roots. And that's probably about it. Okay, I can put this tree in the planting now. So I'm placing the tree and it looks giant over the edge here. So I definitely can't place any of these spruce near the edge of the forest. They're just too tall. So I think it'll have to come in to kind of create that triangular silhouette to the forest. So I'm trying to find a spot on the spruce that has kind of open branches, maybe here, so I can position it kind of close to the other one. Here's a look at my bog forest now, and I think it's looking good. I think these spruce look quite good here. So now I've got to fill in the back with spruce trees. So I'll work on that. I'll root prune them, try and make them as compact as I can, and I'll position them in the back of the planting. I'm laying out the trees. I've got 2 more added behind here, and I'm looking at that stone, and the stone takes up a lot of space, and I don't have really enough room to plant trees in that area because of the stone. So I'm looking at the stone thinking, how much value does it add to the planting? The trees are the focal point. The stone is nice there. I like it. However, I think if it was like maybe a third that size, it'd be perfect there. I think it's just too large and takes up too much valuable planting area on that side of the forest. So I'm going to have to remove the stone. Just take it out. If I find a better one, I'll plant it, but at the moment I don't. So I'll have to go rock collecting and look for, you know, the perfect stone to go in this planting eventually. I tried placing a tall spruce over here just to see what it would look like, and I don't really like it. I don't like, you know, it competes with the dead trees out front. I think I need the spruce more as kind of background trees and have those dead trees as the main focus. Maybe I can just prune that tree back in height or use a different tree. If I look at that tree, you can see there's a lot of buds in this area. So I could take the whole top off the tree. So I think I will. It's got a good strong trunk on it. All right, so I'm going to reduce the height of it quite far back to here, like that. And then I'll reduce branches in the upper part here back further. There's a lot of buds popping out along here that I'm pruning back to. I think that looks better, having it a little bit shorter. All right, I'll get out the next tree. I've got a lot of the trees positioned now. I had to prune back the one in the end quite severely. Hopefully it'll survive. I don't know. So the trees that I don't put in this planting, I'll try and work on reducing them. So if any of these die, I can replace them with another living tree. So I'll keep working on those, trying to miniaturize them, get them smaller and smaller over the years so they can go in this planting eventually if they need to. It's looking good. I'm just wondering about the density of trees. I could maybe put one more small one back here behind the larches. Again, I'd have to prune down a tall one quite severely to make it fit in there. And other than that, I think it's dense enough. I think there's enough open space. There's nothing too jammed against the edges of the pot each side. It's got a nice kind of triangular silhouette. And it's also fairly interesting with the dead trees and the spruce and the larch. I think when I add moss in that, it's going to look quite convincing as a northern planting. I've added 2 more trees, and I've got kind of a double triangle here. In the foreground, the highest point is here, and it's got this asymmetrical triangle. And in the background, the highest point is over here, and I've got this asymmetrical triangle. And it looks quite good. I really like having those kind of 2 layers, the foreground trees and the background trees, and then the 2 offset triangles. I'll give you another view so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. I'll come in here so maybe you can see the 2 different triangles, the foreground triangular shape of the canopy and the background one. So there's the background triangle and then the foreground triangle. Here's a look at the trees that are left over. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'll keep these in pots and I'll try and miniaturize them. So if I have to use them in this planting, I can. I've got all my trees positioned in the forest now. So I'm going to start filling in the soil, leveling it out, trying to get my low bog part in this area and my higher land section over here. And then I'll add moss. I've added the soil around the trees, and I'm not sure about the soil levels yet. I may play around with that some more. But I'm going to give it a good watering just to settle everything in. And then I'll think about the elevations and adding the moss and ground cover. All right, here goes watering can number 2. This is rainwater I'm using. I'm going to start adding my ground cover now. So I'll pop it out of the pot like that, and then I'll plant it. Easy as that. Like that. And then I've got my wild chamomile. I'll use that too. And usually it stays really like a very tight ground cover, but because I have it in bonsai soil and I water it all the time, it tends to grow a little long. So I'll just have to keep it pruned when it's in here. So I'm going to put that right back here. Normally you're taking weeds out of your bonsai. And today I'm adding them in. I'm hoping these will kind of look like ferns or something. Look. I'm out front now looking at the surface of the soil. It's quite high at the back, but it kind of creates a nice triangular shape to the ground. It looks maybe a little more interesting. Maybe I could take a little bit off, but that may compact down a bit when I add the moss too. So that's my next stage, is to add moss to the planting to green it up so I don't see all that perlite. Now I might add a layer of sand also and then plant the moss kind of on the sand. I think that'll be realistic, especially in the dense part here. You wouldn't have moss growing in there necessarily. It might be too dark, so the sand might look better in there. So I'll add a layer of sand first, and then I'll start adding the moss. All right, I'll begin to add the sand. Just kind of, I may have to wash the trees off because I've got sand all in it here. The sun should be hitting the bench this afternoon, so we'll see what this planting looks like in the sunlight eventually. I think it'll look quite nice, I hope. I'll give both the trees and the sand a wash. Kind of settle all that sand in. My next step is to apply the moss to the forest floor. I'm going to try this really coarse moss up front. See how it looks anyway. I filled the card on my camera, so in the meantime I continue to add the moss to the forest. So we'll go in and have a look at it. The work is done on the forest for today, but it's just the start. I've got to get these spruce styled in that bog style with the arrowhead on top of the trees, trying to get that bog spruce type shape to them. It'll be a good challenge, this forest, keeping the trees compact and miniature looking. I don't want to grow them into giant trees or anything, so it'll stay a fairly small, like height-wise, planting. And I'll, work on the landscape in the future. I'm sure there'll be changes. Maybe I'll find that ideal rock I can put in there, or maybe several small ones to kind of give that northern feel to it all. But overall, I'm very happy with the landscape. I think it turned out quite nice, and I think those dead trees in the front really add to the feeling. I think And it'll be exciting in fall when the spruce fill out a bit more and I get the larch trees getting their fall colors. It should look pretty good, I think. So that's something to look forward to this coming fall. Hopefully all will go well with the forest this spring. Everything will live and grow. And that's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.